how do we reconstruct a bond with those who have died? And there clearly are a plenitude of ways that we can do that. As you point out, one of the functions of ritual, both sacred and secular, is to offer forms of that and guidelines. And sometimes that can be very descriptive and prescriptive. I think about Orthodox Jewish friends, one, for example, who recently lost her father. And there are a plenitude of rituals that go from sitting Shiva, even if one's doing it now in front of a computer screen, rather than having people literally come by the house, on through, various memorials that take place a year out from the death and so on, the unveiling of the tombstone. So we have those ways of ritual remembrance that are available to us. These have the advantage of also placing our own suffering and our own grief in a larger context of meaning that has been perhaps refined, but in some sense maintained for thousands of years in some of these ancient traditions. Likewise, we can have our contemporary rituals that may only have a 20-year history of posting blogs to our loved ones online on memorial sites, writing them electronic kind of open letters. Dear Liesel, I will never forget the day that we had our interview. Right, these sorts of very personal, almost chatty connections. So whether they are classic or contemporary, we need our rituals of remembrance, our rituals of reconnection. However, we also have rituals of rumination, if you will. And in psychiatric terms, ritualistic behavior means the repetitive performance of concrete acts in a way that is dysfunctional. And certainly we can also see that. The widow or widower or the bereaved parent who leaves the bedroom of the, once occupied by the loved one precisely as it was for the next 30 years, and invites, few new relationships into his life in order to, in some sense, continue to revise and update their web of caring attachments. It's as if they grow only smaller and more threadbare across time. And in general, even the kind of cognitive aspect of rumination, of going over and over and over again, for example, the events of the death, seemingly in an attempt to mentally reverse it, to make it not so, to attribute blame and fault, often to the self, and sometimes to significant, relevant others in one's life, can produce a kind of embitterment, a kind of guilt, a kind of blame and shame that can be very corrosive of relationships. And yet it is fully understandable when one is trying to take on board such a horrific story.
In a clinical context, how do you help people who seem to be stuck in this repetitive reliving, rumination, self-blame? How do you help them to sort of change their story?
Well, there are many answers to that, and maybe I can give you just a handful on a range from the simple to the more complex. On the simple side of things, one can certainly empathize with the implied need to sort through the story. Often it is the fact that they have been unaccompanied well by others who provide anything more than simple consolation as they contend with the story. So maybe this isn't on the simple side after all, but if we practice a kind of listening that is non-anxious, generous, but that also provides kind of equal measures of caring and daring, so we're providing support, but we're also challenging people to, for example, to retell slowly the story of the loss. It might be over a period of an hour or more, and to do so in a way that they attend to not only the shocking or tragic external narrative episodes, what's happening when, I discovered my loved one motionless in bed. I called the doctors. I was at the hospital. He died. But also then to weave that external narrative strand together with an internal narrative strand, a kind of deep recollection and voicing of what was happening in you at that time that you first encountered his kind of still body in that bedroom. And when you made that call, what were you aware of when the emergency health workers on the other end answered the line, and when they arrived at the house and you heard their talk between themselves as they dealt with him? What was going through you as that was going on around you? And so we slowly reconstruct both the internal and the external narrative. And then the third strand of the braid is really the meaning-oriented narrative. What did you think was happening at that time? What did that mean to you when the doctor said that? And so we're helping the person put together a fuller and more integrated story that goes somewhere rather than that just endlessly loops in this space without feedback, without elaboration, without greater coherence, without any novelty. People are just kind of cycling in the same rut. So that kind of what we call restorative retelling can be one way through rumination.
Yeah, I can really see that. And I guess the sense that, I mean, the way you describe it, I almost get a sense of that repetitive reliving or retelling as almost a form of avoidance, that actually it's not integrating the experience, but almost trying to undo the experience. And I can see how really slowing someone down can, allow for a much fuller looking at the experience.
That's right.
That's happening, and integrating it, accommodating it in some way. So
yeah, I think that's well said. There are elements of avoidance. We may be avoiding weaving in the strands that have to do with what we prefer not to have to contend with, and of course that is ultimately includes the need to change the story, to revise the story, to begin writing a new chapter, and not to keep rereading the current one.
And why symbolic, forms of representing the relationship are more powerful, because again, they're adaptable and they allow that relationship to change and evolve, but for that person still to be present, but in a new way, in a non-physical way.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully said. That's really the core of it. I think of it in terms of a tension that plays out along a dimension of time, that we move from saying, or intending in a way, to retreat to a place where the world was as it had been, right, at a better time when the person was still living. That retreat to the past is, obviously precludes our full engagement in the present. And if we're able to switch the object of our bonding to not how can I go back to a place that I had the bond, and to ask the question, how can I carry my loved one with me into a changed future? Then it's a kind of question that profoundly respects the relationship, but that in a sense extends the existence and relevance of our loved one in the world into a world yet to be, and one about which we may have some important decision making to contend with. What do I do now, and how do I carry conversations about my ex-wife who died into my new relationship? How can I continue to honor the life of the child I have who died in infancy with my still living children as they age into adolescence?